So, how did these freedoms become ours? To give you an overview of the history, it wasn't by mistake. It didn't magically appear. The Hebraic or the Hebrew template from Moses and the Old Testament sits there as probably the only empire or nation prior to Christ within which these kinds of freedoms existed. Because you have to have belief in a God to have a basis for human rights and the obligation of government to limit its power to protect people. You come through to Jesus asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Now there's quite a bit of thought in that statement, but one of the important points is that it says there are things that are not Caesar's. This is the concept of the limitation of power. Governments don't exist for their own ends. That's the growth of power, the growth of bureaucracy, the growth of laws, until all of you down there are just paying taxes and helping us, the upper class, the ruling class, to govern and have great freedoms, while you, the ruled class, suffer. Government exists for the freedom of the people to protect their rights and their opportunities because they are created individuals in the image of God. This comes through and begins to have its effect through Christians in the 300s. Constantine becomes a Christian and stops the Christian persecution. As an illustration, about 60 years later, Emperor Theodosius is in power and he has embraced Christian belief. There is an uprising, a rebellion, and he goes and squashes it, and he basically massacres a whole lot of people to stop it. He comes back home and he wants to go to church, and he's met by the pastor at the door, and his name was Ambrose. And Ambrose says, you're not allowed in here. And the emperor of the known world says, what are you talking about? I'm the emperor of the known world. He says, you do not realize how great your crime was. Your hands are stained with blood from an unjust massacre. Now, at any other point in human history, Ambrose would have lost his head. What's remarkable here is that he doesn't. The ethic of Jesus and of the Hebrew template was beginning to get into everybody within a society to create a context within which human freedoms could be respected, and there would be a limitation placed on the power of government. In 890, King Alfred the Greater, the only monarch of England ever to be called great, made the Ten Commandments and Jesus' golden rule, do to others as you'd have them do to you, the foundation for the rights and the freedoms of the British people. A couple of hundred years later, in 1215, the Magna Carta was an agreement between the king and the barons or lords of England, who each overruled different people themselves. And they were kind of saying, we're not just here to give you taxes and everything you want, so you as the king can sit high and mighty and free and rich and wealthy and enjoy life. You've got a responsibility to protect the environment within which we are free. And we can rise up and fight against you if you won't recognise that we have rights. And so that agreement was broken very shortly afterwards, but was recreated with many of the monarchs that followed for the next few hundred years. The ideas of the Hebraic template and of Jesus were getting into the minds of the people, creating a context. And these thoughts were taken to Germany through Calvin, to Scotland through John Knox, to Ireland through St Patrick, to America through the battle for independence, and to New Zealand from our English sort of origins, from which we have got our values, which are biblical, related to human rights and related to democratic government. And in terms of establishing whether we're a Christian nation, in my mind there's no question that we are, because our values are not Islamic values. Our values are not Buddhist or Hindu or Taoist values. Our values are not atheistic values. Our values as a nation are soundly Christian in their origins and foundations. And in terms of the first sitting of our parliament, in case you're not aware, the first parliamentary debate was about who would open in prayer in New Zealand's history. Because if you let the Anglican open in prayer, which was the thought, the problem is that might make us like England, in which the Anglican church was married to the state, with the monarch as the head of both the church and over the government. And so to ensure we had a separation of church power from state power, which is another matter, which is good, church power shouldn't overrule, they didn't want to let an Anglican pray. So the solution was to send someone down the street to find the first clergyman, the first pastor they could, and to bring them back, and they opened in prayer. And that's how the matter was resolved. So incredible privilege. You live in a nation with freedom, with equality, with unbelievable prosperity. But can it be lost?